Welcome to Self-Sufficiency with Chris and Steve. This is a podcast about being more self-sufficient and saving money in doing so. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, Parler, Instagram, and go subscribe to us on YouTube. We hope you enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to Self-Sufficiency with Chris and Steve. I'm Chris, and I got Steve on the other end of the mic, and today we're going to talk about taxes, and not taxes as in the government stealing massive amounts of money from you, but what you can do with that return that you might get at the end of the year, where you get some of your hard-earned money back, if you get some money back, and different things that you can use that money on to save a buck or two. So that's what we're going to be focused on. What some things that you can use, either these stimulus checks or your tax money or variations of both. And we'll talk about, I will go over briefly how you can actually get a return on your taxes, possibly. Excuse me. So before we get into that, what have you been doing in the world of self-sufficiency, Steve?
Prepping for, I got some water containers, catch basin, and I got a lot of my time has been spent getting ready for the cold weather that we just got, getting all my animals squared away, getting hay into the barn for the goats, and getting water for the dogs. And it's going to be in the single digits here in a couple of days, so I'm going to have to do something with my outside dog. I'm going to have to put her in the a root cellar. But I picked up some water catch basins, and I picked up a goat/sheep trough because they're shallow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 50 or 100 gallons. And what I'm going to do is set it on my back pasture, and then I'm going to funnel water into it off of my roof. The way my pasture lays, I'll be able to take it right off the roof. And of course, it's going downhill and hits that first hill on the back side of my house, and that's the back pasture. And have it go into that part of it go into that trough. So that's sort of what I've been working on. I got a generator a couple of weeks ago, and then I made up a cord because it's got the big plug for 240 volts. So I made up a cord so I can just wire it straight into my panel in my garage. And my garage has a 60 amp feed that comes back into my house, so I can back feed our panel from the garage.
That's a good deal.
That's some of the stuff I've been doing.
That's good.
And collecting eggs. And collecting duck eggs. My ducks have been laying eggs like gangbusters, which I didn't know ducks would lay eggs in friggin' February, but they do.
Wow.
So learn something new every day.
If you have,
and they're massive.
If you have a small surplus of those at some point, I would like to try them. I would buy some.
Dude, the next time you come by, I'll hook you up.
Okay.
They are amazing to bake with. It makes the best breads. Because they're super rich. Super rich. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing. What about you, Chris?
I have been planning some things. I've been remodeling my house. I've been trying to make it more efficient, changing a couple doors out, fixing a couple things that need to be fixed. I've been doing firewood. I need more firewood, so I'm trying to cut and split some firewood because, believe it or not, I ran out almost.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, we've burned significantly more than what I thought we were going to burn this year. I think we typically burn maybe 1 to 3 ricks, and we've burned about 6 so far.
Oh, well, it's been a cold winter.
That's the thing. I didn't really think it was all that cold, but looking back between this winter and last winter, I mean, we've had days in the 20s a lot this winter, and we did have some really nasty cold snaps last winter, but for the most part, it stayed 30s or above.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just been sourcing some wood before I run out. I haven't ran out, but I've been going easy on the wood burning in case the power goes out. I want to have maintain at least a week's surplus wood to
Gotcha.
have time to source more if the power goes out. And
Gotcha.
I've been 3D printing as always. I recently printed a Nephilim AR-10 lower receiver that I'm in the process of testing. I need to anneal it, and I've got to try a couple different things. I printed an AR-15 lower receiver. Apparently, a lot of people have seen that on library.tv. I put the Octolapse footage up. Well, I went to put it together, and I made some critical mistakes when I put it together. And I ended up basically breaking it. And and what happened was I printed it at a lower temperature to make it look better. But when I printed it at the lower temperature, I got layer adhesion issues. So when I went to go screw the buffer tube in, I cranked on it a little bit too hard and I cracked it. So I'm working on some workarounds for that with this carbon fiber polycarbonate. I plan on just printing one out of PLA because that's what Deterrence Dispense recommends is PLA. So I just want to do that out of PLA just to get one going and have it, and then basically screw with the exotic filaments later, because PLA is biodegradable. If it breaks on me, I can just print more. It's cheap, and I can just throw it in the compost pile if it breaks. And I've been sourcing IBC totes. I've been sourcing solar panels. I put a couple requests out on the barter and crypto exchange groups, TSP Indiana, stuff like that. Just ask advice. And that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. I found some solar panels at a reasonable price. And we'll talk about some cost savings that you can do with solar if you can find solar at a reasonable price, because it's all about return. You obviously want to get a return on your investment, and it's going to take time to pay that investment off. And the least amount of time it takes, or the less amount of time it takes, the sooner you can actually turn a profit and actually legitimately save money on these items. And that's where I'm at. I'm doing my planning for spring as far as how exactly I'm going to lay my yard out. I'm planning on putting trees on contour with berms and swales. The reason I am doing swales is because I do plan on filling up a water catchment system, a pond, using excess water that runs off the swales. And I want to have like a high point pond or a key line pond. And then I'd like to have a pond at the bottom as well. And we'll talk about that more in another episode once I actually get to implement it. But that is the plan. It's going to be fruit trees, nut trees, a lot of perennials this year. Not as many annuals. All the annuals will be in the greenhouse. And that's pretty much what I got. Talk about maybe doing some raised beds and some gardening and stuff too. So let's roll into this. First things first, maybe we should talk about how you can actually get more money back on your tax return. And let's take about a couple minutes to talk about that. So for those that didn't know, Steve and I had a business together. I had to opt out of that business for personal reasons, but that business actually returned a tax return. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. You want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as partners in this business, that pretty much when you have your own LLC and you're trying to make money at a whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's legal. If you're going to do this, pretty much everything you do that has to do with that business is a tax deduction, but you just have to keep the records. So, any equipment you buy, any materials you buy, any storage units you use, any space you use to work in, any business you do with anybody else to help you do this business, you have to pay them. The lists just go on and on and on. Of course, you have to file. There's the stuff you have to do to file. You can't just file like normal. You have to file a separate form. And then, but when you do that, of course, you either show a loss or a profit. And then typical LLC is allowed to show a loss for 3 years. And after that, you got to show a profit. Now, profit means $1. If you show $1 profit after all your expenses are paid, then you still made a profit. It didn't say how much you had to profit, just says you have to profit. So the name of the game is to keep really good records and incorporate as much as you do through your business. That way, it's almost like you're killing two birds with one stone. You're getting things accomplished you need to get accomplished anyway, but if you're able to incorporate it into your business, you're also doing it through your business, and it's a legitimate tax deduction. So that's pretty much it. Is that what you were looking for, Chris?
That's exactly what I was looking for, Steve.
Okay. All right.
Now, since then, I have started a sole proprietorship, and this podcast, as well as videos I do on library.tv and YouTube, are part of this content generating business. I generate content for you guys. Obviously, me and Steve are content generators right now, right?
Yep.
Steve has a LLC. I have a sole proprietorship, and we generate content. So anything that goes towards generating that content, as far as if I let me stop real quick. This is in no way, shape, or form legal advice or tax advice of any sort. Do everything at your own risk. We are not liable for anything. And I will put a warning at the beginning of the show, just in case.
Absolutely.
This is for entertainment purposes only. Hint, hint. So anything that I do for content generation, if I want to build an AR-15 and videotape myself doing it and show you, the listener, how to build an AR-15, well, that recording device is tax deductible. The stand is tax deductible. The lower part's deductible. The lower is tax deductible. The entire kit's tax deductible. The barrel's tax deductible. The chair I'm sitting in is tax deductible. The beer I'm drinking at the time when I'm doing it is tax deductible. Make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
If I have a meeting with Steve and we talk about the podcast over dinner, that dinner is tax deductible. So keep that in mind. The tax code was written by businessmen for businessmen. So if you want to, I don't know, not skirt the system, what's the word I'm looking for? If you want to beat the man, you got to act like the man. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to play the game. Sometimes you want to quit altogether. And right now I'm talking about the option of playing the game a little bit. In a later podcast, we will be talking about quitting the game altogether. Yeah. So with that, you ought to be able to get a tax return on some items. And I'm talking like you're doing this as a legitimate business. It's fraud if you do this. and you're not a legitimate business. I have a legitimate business. This is part of my business. I do consulting. I also do electrical work, and anything that I have on paper that shows I made a revenue goes towards my taxes, and I pay taxes on that. If somebody pays me cash, well, do the math on that. That's how you got to play the game. So with that, you've started your business, and literally, in order to start a sole proprietorship, you just have to go to the IRS website and get an employer identification number, and then you may or may not have to register that with your county clerk. I don't know. It's up to you to look up your state and local laws. But I'm telling you, an LLC typically costs money, but it's cheap. It's like, what is it in Kentucky? $175 a year.
Yeah. You got to pay to the state.
Yeah.
To set it up through an attorney, it might cost you a couple $100.
Did you save more tax money than $175?
Oh, heck yeah.
Exactly. A sole proprietorship costs nothing, to the best of my knowledge, at least in Indiana. So that's a decent option. Start a business, work for yourself. Stop giving the man all your money and then giving the government all your money. So, or giving the man all your labor and the government all your money.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some things. Say you do get a tax return, maybe $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $10,000. I don't know what you're going to get back. Depends on how much money you make and how well you play the game. And then the government's been handing money out left and right with these stimulus checks.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because they can just make it. They can just
they
invent
can
it.
invent it out of thin air. Like we said, if you don't believe me, listen to the podcast we did called "The Illusion of the Dollar," and we explain more about it. And look it up. Try to find the 2021 definition of what the U.S. dollar is. Bet you can't find it. So what's going to happen is you're going to get tax money back. You're going to get these stimulus checks. And then once you spend your stimulus checks and that money goes into circulation, you're going to get this magical thing. And that money is not going to be worth as much. And it's going to affect you negatively in the long run. And the following that we're going to talk about are some things that we can do to negate that negative effect that you're probably going to feel later on this year. So one of those things is getting a wood stove. Depending on where you are, obviously, if you're in Florida, South Florida, you might not need a wood stove. If you're in Indiana or Kentucky, this year a wood stove has been really handy. And I'd venture to say anybody north of Florida could benefit off of a wood stove.
Just pretty much.
I don't know. Texas, maybe not, but you know, if you get cold winter, the wood stove helps.
Parts of Texas, there's parts of Texas that get cold.
Yeah, North Texas does.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a wood stove. What kind of wood stove do you have, Steve?
Mine's a pellet stove. Mine uses the wood pellet. Now, you remember originally I'm the one that introduced you to the high efficiency wood burning stove.
Thank you. Thank you very much, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome. My original home, it was a freestanding wood stove, and it ran in the 80-something% efficiency rating, which was phenomenal. And I could heat my whole house on 2 ricks of wood, but it was only 1,000 square foot house. But I stoned up the wall and loaded up with hickory, and buddy, it would just be so warm. But the problem with the high efficiency wood burning stove is they're a little bit trickier to get the fire going. And my family members I could never get them to learn how to get it. So if once it's burning, you could throw wet wood in there and it would burn. But to get it going, they could never get that to happen. So when we moved to our new house out on our land, we bought a pellet stove. The downside of a pellet stove is twofold. Number one, you always got to have power because it uses it's like forced air. It's like a forced air gas furnace, except instead of burning gas, you're burning wood. So you got to have an electric motor. You got to have electric to fuel your fans and to fuel your all your little motors that feed it. But it's completely automatic. So, and then the second thing is you depend on. It takes a certain size pellet, so you gotta stock up on them in advance, and don't wait till the middle of winter, or you're just out of luck. The way to negate those two problems is just have backup power, because the whole unit draws 3 amps.
At 120 volts.
And you buy it by 3 amps at 120 volts. It's like nothing.
240. That's 360 watts.
Yeah.
Not very much.
Yeah, most people's ceiling fans with their lights on draw more than that. So, but even with, and buy it by the ton, you buy the wood by the ton. If you go the pellet stove, it's cleaner. As far as it's not as messy. My kids, I mean, you just turn it on like an appliance, and it does everything. It's got its own igniter and the whole 9 yards. And if you buy it in bulk, you get a discount, and it's pretty comparable to wood. It's still not as cheap as like what you're doing, freestanding stoves, but it's still way cheaper than gas or electric by like a fifth. I think it cost me, less than $500 for all my wood for this winter. And if I was heating this house with gas, minimum $2,000. And if it's electric, it'd probably be more than that. I don't even want to think about what it costs to heat this house with electric. So, and of course it's a wood heat, and it's hard to beat wood heat. So anyway, so you can tell them about your stove, because you have an insert. I had a freestanding, you had an insert, but they make high efficiency inserts. That go right in.
Now, putting in a freestanding wood stove wouldn't be all that hard. What it equates to is you need to buy the stove. You need to find a place to put the stove away from flammable objects. And then you need to run single wall pipe up to your ceiling, and then you run a transition to double or triple wall pipe through the ceiling and up to your chimney. Now that's where it gets expensive, is the double or triple wall pipe.
Right.
But you just got to look around and find good deals on that. Now, the other option is some homes. My home already had a fireplace in it, and fireplaces are really inefficient. They run at about a 5 to 10% efficiency because they create radiant heat. But one, all the heat goes up to the chimney, and two, all the heat stuff that you heat up, the air that you heat up in your home, goes out the chimney. So it's hard to heat with a traditional fireplace. So the solution to that is I went to northerntool.com and I got a fireplace insert from Vogelzang, and it basically just fit right in my fireplace. It even came with a stainless steel sleeve chimney, and I just basically I went to the top of my roof and I pushed it down my existing chimney. After I swept the chimney of creosote, the existing chimney of creosote, I pushed the 6-inch chimney sleeve into my 8-inch fireplace chimney, hooked it up to my wood stove, and it's like a freestanding wood stove, but it's a fireplace insert. That fireplace insert, when I bought it, was $1,100 on Northern Tool. Right now, it is $1,500 on Northern Tool. The reason being is inflation. Guess how much? Guess what percentage it went up from $1,100 to $1,500? 30%. Go back and listen to our episode called The Illusion of the Dollar. We talk about 30% a lot. It's actually 36% is what it went up.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, another 1.9 trillion was pumped into our market. There's your other 6%.
There it is.
That's it. Ding, ding, ding. Funny how that works.
Electricity has gotten more expensive. Our electricity went from being around 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour to 12 cents a kilowatt hour.
Ooh.
And that goes back to, if we had to heat this home, it would cost us, just heating the home, probably about $300 to $400 a month in electricity. And the wood stove saves us $200 easy dollars a month. I mean, that's pretty big savings. We've recuperated our savings on it and some so far. Plus, it's a good form of backup heat. Now, you're going to have to deal with your insurance on this. If you have a existing stove of some sort, that's good. If not, you'll have to work out your insurance. And
do what?
Yeah, you have to work it out with your insurance.
Yeah, you just got to follow the fire. You got to follow the fire code.
That is NFPA 211 is the fire code for that.
Yeah.
Use what is it? There's several rules in there for your chimney height and all that stuff. Just follow that. It's free PDF. You can find the PDF online. If you plan on installing it yourself. If not, you'd have a certified chimney sweep do it. It will save you money in the long run. It will provide a source of backup heat. If you have an existing fireplace, I would install it myself, and I would get that Vogelzang kit or find a cheap one, but I can't vouch for any other ones because I have the Vogelzang and it works good for me. I haven't tried the other ones. Your other route is, if you have a traditional wood stove, switched over to a freestanding high efficiency stove. And there's one on Northern Tool for $849, and it produces 90,000 BTUs of heat. To put into perspective, mine produces 60,000 BTUs of heat, and it heats a 1,920 square foot home. My dog is barking.
Yeah, I hear him.
So, all right, back to that. So that's what I would look into as a wood stove. Now, you're going to have wood. And if you buy wood, it's typically $50 a rick. That's still not bad. If you can heat your home with 10 ricks, you're looking at 500. What would that be? 10 ricks, $500 to heat your home for if you used up to 10 ricks for the entire winter. I don't think that's too unreasonable. Backup for if the electricity or gas or whatever goes out, you have a way to still heat your home and you're not miserable. Like mine, it has an electric blower on it, but even if the electric blower goes out, the electricity goes out, it will still provide heat. It just won't disperse it as well. And then obviously you're going to want a chainsaw if you and a splitting maul if you want to go the wood route. And it does take a lot of work, and you can actually build a lot of muscle splitting wood and trees. It's a pretty good skill to have. And I'm in the market for a chainsaw right now, and once I decide on what I get, I will write a review on it and let you guys know. So, do you have anything else to add for heating?
No, that's pretty much it. If you do get anything that has a blower motor, think about a backup way to power it. That way you don't even miss a beat. Like your fan and yours probably doesn't draw an amp and a half. I'm sure it's a little simple. It's
a shaded pole. It's a shaded pole motor with a squirrel cage fan, and it's I'm wanting to say it draws 0.7 amps.
Yeah, there you go.
At 120 volts, so it draws less than 100 watts.
Right. Yeah. So it wouldn't take much to back that up. And that's why I got a generator. The generator will carry my stove and my refrigerator and pretty much anything I need to just pretty much run during emergency, especially in the wintertime. So if we lose power, none of my food goes bad, and that should
be our next topic. Is backup power. So let's talk about this generator you have, because I haven't priced one yet,
Okay.
except for GovPlanet. If you ever go to govplanet.com, it is military surplus shit and government surplus shit. Like they've got 3,000 watt diesel generators on there, and like the starting bid's like $200 on them. So with that being said, let's hear about your generator. What kind of generator did you get?
Oh gosh, I can't even remember the name of it. Daggone it. Anyway, it's a 6,500 watt. I think it's a 7-gallon capacity.
Wait, how many?
And it'll run all day on 50% power. It has both a 240 volt RV outlet on it, and then it has two GFI protected 20 amp outlets on it. So what I did was I got the cord that plugs into it, the corded end, which I just so happen to have one because, you know, we're electricians, so we have that kind of stuff laying around. I don't even remember where I got it. And I had an 8-gauge wire cable, 4-wire cable. So I just wired that up, and of course the other end's open. And then in the event of a power loss, all I have to do is turn off my main breaker and then wire in my cord to my panel in my garage, which is backfed off of my main panel. And it will feed all that power into a 60 amp breaker into my house from the garage. And my garage is like well over 25 feet from my house. It's probably closer to 75. So that puts the generator way far away from my house. So you do away with the carbon monoxide poisoning hazard. You lower your sound, and then, you know, it's fed via underground cables back to my house. So that's my deal. And now that will not care. Like if I turned everything on my house, that would not run it. But I don't need everything in my house. So I would cut the things off that aren't required. Keep the things on, like the stoves and refrigerators and the freezers. Those would definitely stay on because those don't draw a lot of power. And then, of course, if you do this, you got a couple of options. You can either put a transfer switch in yourself, or if you're disciplined enough, you can just turn your main breaker off and then run your generator. And then when power comes back on, you can turn your generator off and then kick your main breaker back on. And for everybody out there that doesn't understand why you do that, if you power your house with your own generator and you don't turn off your main breaker, the power from your generator goes up your pole, or into your line, and either underground out to your pad mount transformer out on the street, or goes up the pole to an overhead transformer, and it goes through that transformer and it gets transformed up, because transformers don't care where the power comes from. So the 240 volt side of the transformer is being fed by your little 6,500 watt generator, and then it goes through that transformer, and then it's pumping out 7,200 or 13,800 on the other side. And the linemen that have to come out and do work don't want to get killed. So that's why you turn the main breaker off. That protects them and keeps people from getting hurt. That's why they really want you to just put a transfer switch in. And transfer switch will kill the power and keep that from going through. You just got to keep that in mind. That's my generator. And if you go the natural gas route, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, back in 2010 when we had the big we had an ice storm one year, and then the next year we had the big windstorm. So back-to-back years, people lost power for days and weeks on end, several times in a row. And all these people went out and bought these whole house generators that run off their natural gas. Well, when they lost power for 10 days, and their natural gas generators kicked on and powered their house, they didn't miss a beat until they got their gas bill. And then they were like, holy crap, why did I get a $600 gas bill? And that's because to run a generator around the clock off of natural gas is expensive. So you got to keep that in mind. How much electric do you want? How much are you willing to spend for you not to lose your everyday conveniences? So I guess you got to decide how much you need.
I see.
To stay convenient.
Yeah, I completely missed that. I wasn't here in 2010. I think I was on the USS Kearsarge at the time, floating out in the middle of the ocean. But that sounds awful. But yeah, we had 2005. We had 3 feet of snow, and power was out. And then 1996, the power was out for like 2 weeks straight. That's where that wood stove came in handy because it was like negative 28 outside at the time, Fahrenheit. And we were living in a house that was built before the Civil War, and it didn't have a lot of insulation. So, but yeah, so your generator is 6,500 watts, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty significant. That's a lot. You could run a lot of shit off that. Yeah. Yeah, you could run a bunch of stuff off that.
Do what?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There shouldn't be any reason why I would be able to. I mean, I'll even be able to. I'll be able to run my hot water heater.
Yeah, you could run your heat pump off of that.
I could. Oh yeah, my heat pump.
Mine does. Mine draws. I think overall my entire heating system, including the electric strips, is something like 5,000 watts. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, my heat pump is the mini split system.
Super efficient.
It doesn't have heat strips. It's like a 22 SEER, full load, hottest part of the year.
That's insane.
It draws 7 amps. That's what.
Now, is that on a 240 volt breaker, 2-pole breakers?
That's 200. That's a 240 volt, 25 amp breaker.
It's 240 volts at 7 amps. You're talking.
Full load.
Let's do some math. Let's do some Ohm's law real quick. I don't have my calculator here. Hang on. Wow, that's significant.
Yeah, I'm picking up.
That's 1,680 watts. That's not a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So in the summer, that will cool my house. And so if we had a tornado come through in the summertime or something, or major straight line wind damage and take down a bunch of power lines, and then it gets hotter than blue blazes.
Yeah. Well, now, if you go the generator route, you're going to have to store fuel of whatever type the generator takes. Now, let's talk about fuel storage. Yep. So, 60 gallons of fuel wouldn't be that hard to store. That's 12 5-gallon cans. Jack Spirko from the Survival Podcast recommends that you can do 12 5-gallon cans. That's 60 gallons of gas total. And you cycle them through once a month. So your fuel's never a year old. Every month you take one of those 5-gallon cans, you dump it in your vehicle, and then you go fill it back up, and then you just keep running through them. That way, if something does happen, you have 60 gallons of gas. How long would that generator run off of 60 gallons of gas, you think? Now, keep in mind, you don't have to run this thing 24/7. You can cycle your fridge and freezer like 4 hours.
Oh no, absolutely not. While you're sleeping at night, if it's not critical that you have power, if you like pump heat into your house during the day, and then at night you don't run it, because your refrigerators and your freezers are not going to be open. You're not going to be getting in and out of your refrigerators at night because you're asleep. So, I mean, realistically, you wouldn't need it at night except if in extreme temperatures, where you would need it to put heat into your house so your pipes don't freeze. But like my house, and yours a new home, so yours probably holds its temperature pretty well. Like the other day, just a few days ago, I cleaned out my pellet stove and forgot to turn it back on that evening, and it didn't run all night. Well, when I got up the next morning, it was still 66.
Wow, that's pretty good.
So, you know, yeah, it only lost 4 degrees overnight, and it's been chilly up here. So, I mean,
yeah,
like we said, it's been a cool winter. But with that being said, like you could run it right up till 10 or 11 at night, shut it down, then get up early a.m. And get the heat going back in your house so your house don't cool down too much. And then, of course, your refrigerators, all your food will stay just fine because you're not opening and closing them. And, just have everybody get their showers during the day, cycle through your breakers, turn your hot water heater on, get your showers, and then turn that breaker back off. Don't use that power. Because, it'll run, they said it'll run 12 hours on 50% load.
yeah.
So
12 hours on 60%. That's pretty good.
yeah.
You honestly, in all honesty, you could probably run it 6 hours a day and be fine. If you had to had to worry about fuel conservation. So you're getting two days worth of running for 7 gallons. So 60 gallons, that's 740. 8. That would get you about 16 days worth of continuous use.
Yeah. Yeah, without having to go get more fuel if you kept the amount of gas.
Yeah,
on
say like a tornado hits and you can't go out and get fuel. You're good for like 16 days.
Yeah.
That's not including, if you drain the mower, drain the tank in the car, or whatever you want to do. So now the next option, it's great to have as a backup, but it really won't save you any money, and you'll never get a return on your investment on it until you actually need it. And which is where I'd like to talk about, generating your power through solar, wind, and I just found a guy on MeWe who was selling 250-watt solar panels for $125 a piece. If you buy a 20 pallet, $1,040 a watt. Typically, solar panels go for $1 a watt. So you're saving a bunch of money, and this guy's got like several hundred of these panels. That being said, I haven't bought any yet. I plan on buying maybe 1 or 2 with some cryptocurrency. And I'd like to measure the output, stuff like that, exactly how much you can put out with these to get an actual cost estimation on how much you can save. Let's say you get $2,000. Well, you get $3,000 back. You go to buy solar panels for $2,000. That's $5,000 of solar panels. Now, Steve and I are both electricians, and I think we need to break down electricity a little bit so people really understand this, on how this works. Billed on your electricity, you are billed per kilowatt hour, and a kilowatt hour is you measure what it means. What it says, 1 kilowatt in an hour. So if you ran 1,000 watt, which would be 1 kilowatt device for 1 hour, you've just used 1 kilowatt hour of power. Conversely, if you ran 100 watt device for 10 hours, you've just generated the same 1 kilowatt hour of power, is what your consumption is. So now, how much is your electricity per kilowatt hour, Steve?
Oh, it's I'm on a cooperative. I'm out in the country, so it's I think we're running about 12 to 13
That's what I'm running
cents
too,
per
about 12 cents a
kilowatt
kilowatt
hour out
hour. So
here.
a little bit of Ohm's law. If you ever want to figure out power in watts, you take your voltage times your amperage, and that's your power. Volts times amps equals power in watts, or volt amps reactive or whatever. We won't go into that. We'll just keep it simple. Voltage, amperage, and resistance, and power. So, for example, 120 volts at 3 amps, which is what your stove runs on. That's 120. That's 360 watts of power. If you ran that for 1 hour, that would be 360 watt hours of power consumed, or 0.36 kilowatt hours. Now that we're tracking, so that 0.36, that's roughly a third of a kilowatt hour. Call it a third of a kilowatt hour. That would cost you 4 cents an hour to run. That's how basically you can calculate how all this works. Your microwave, if you ran your microwave for an hour straight, there's 12. That's 1.2 kilowatt hours you've just generated at a 1200 watt microwave. So now let's go back to generating power, not consuming it. So if you bought 20 of these panels at $2,000, that's 5,000 watts of power. Now, obviously, the sun doesn't always shine. Right now, how much full daylight do we have right now in January or in February, whatever it is, 2021?
Well, the sun rises at
Okay.
about 7:50, and the sun sets at just about
So
6:00.
7:50 to 6:00.
Whatever that is.
We'll call it 8 to 6. That's 10 hours. Now, obviously, when the sun first comes up, and then it sets on the horizon, you're not going to be generating a lot of power because your solar panels aren't really going to be facing the sun then. So if you calculated, honestly, I'd say anywhere from 7 to 8 hours of sun, because you're still going to be generating when the sun's not directly overhead. You're just not going to be generating as much. So you got to calculate for that. But say if you had full sun. Now, obviously, you're not going to always have full sun depending on where you're at. But I'd say we have a decent amount of full sun here, don't we? I'd say at least 60% of the time we have sunny days, right?
Yeah. I mean,
well, we're going to.
Yeah. But if you got cloud cover or those days where the big white puffy clouds, when those go over the sun and block the sun, your power output's going to go down, and then when the sun comes back out, your power output will go back up, and then back down, then back up. No. It's not a consistent
which is
power.
why it helps to store it, and we're going to talk about grid tie inverters here in a second too. So we'll talk about just a grid tie system right now because it's the fastest, cheapest way to get a return on your power, but you won't have any backup power. So at 5,000 watts, say you do get 8 hours of full sun a day, and that includes the cloud cover and stuff. We'll call it 7. 7, I think, would be reasonable. Obviously, you're going to have cloudy days, but we're going to talk about what you're going to do on those cloudy days too, because you don't want to just rely on solar. But let's go back to my handy calculator. Can you still hear me, Steve? Okay. Back to the calculator.
Yeah,
so 5,000 watts. So if you're putting out 5,000 watts now, I'm going to do a reduction on this as well. So 5,000 times 7 hours, that's 35,000 watt hours. That's 35 kilowatt hours, right? The average home, I think, uses roughly 30 to 50 kilowatt hours a day. So you produce a significant amount of your electricity. But we're going to multiply that by 80% for heat, continuous loads, your cloud cover and stuff. So
you there?
Yeah.
You there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry we lost connection.
Oh, what happened?
Last thing you heard.
5,000 kilowatt hours per day. You said we'll talk about storage later. Grid tie unit. Uh, 7 hours a
Oh yeah,
day. 7 hours a
I got
day.
to.
So 35 kilowatt hours. You said typical home runs on between 35 and 50. That was right where that's where we left off.
Okay, so as you were, now I went ahead and multiplied that by 80% for losses and stuff. So we came up with 28 kilowatt hours possible a day under ideal conditions to generate power. So, and that would save you about $100 a month. At 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And it would cost about $2,800 to get that system going with just the panels and grid tie inverters, not including the wire and stuff. But aluminum wire is pretty cheap, and you could set it up. I'd venture to say you could probably set it up for about $100 with the wire and stuff. So, I figured most likely a 28 to 30 month return on your investment.
Bad.
So
Less
about
than
2 years, you could have your panels paid off. The life on solar panels. Well, solar panels last what, like 20 years or something?
20 years.
So
20 years, they're done.
Yeah,
You gotta turn them in and start over. So
that's not bad. So you could pay them off in 2 years, and then you'd have to go back and get more panels, but you've already got the grid tie inverters and stuff, providing they didn't burn up or some crazy shit. And that's running your grid tie inverters at an 80% load, which I think would be fairly reasonable. And you can always add more if you get efficiency issues. But grid tie inverters are typically run 90% efficiency or better,
that's good
because they run maximum power point tracking. They have a voltage range that they'll run on.
Okay.
So they'll convert power at the maximum efficiency, even if your panels aren't in full sunlight. And then obviously you can get tracking mounts for your panels. It's where they track the sun across. I think they use like Freon gas, so when it heats up one side, it causes the panel to turn towards the side that's heating up or towards the sun.
Now that's brilliant.
Yeah, it makes them much more efficient. I think you gain about 50% efficiency or some shit on them.
Oh, I'm sure it's significant because the angle of the sun hitting them is critical.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure post your ideas to our page on MeWay. I'm sure we could figure out poor man's way of doing this too. Using drill motors, some all thread, and a photo eye, a set of photo eyes.
Right.
But that'll be in the makings for some other time. So that's where we're at. So you got a 28 month turnaround on that. Say, and then after that, it's all downhill from there. You're saving $100 a month after 2 years, and you're scot free. So imagine reducing your electric bill by $100 a month. That's $1,200 a year you'd save. And now let's talk about the backup portion of it. Now, we talked about what happens in the sun. The sun doesn't always shine. Well, typically, if the sun's not shining, what's happening, Steve?
You're not making power.
Well, obviously, but what other way can we make power?
Do what?
Typically, if the sun's not shining, the wind is blowing. Think about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Every time you've ever had cloud cover, you typically have decent wind, depending on where you're at. Now, where I'm at, the weather bug says Valonia, Indiana, but I'm not really in Valonia. I'm at the top of a hill on a plateau, and Valonia runs 10-mile-an-hour winds. And I venture to say we get consistent 20 to 30-mile-an-hour winds here at ground level.
That's wild.
Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, I know because I live up on a hill too.
Yeah.
I mean.
So the higher you go, the better your windmill is going to work. But 40 to 60 feet seems to be pretty much the norm, and they sell tower kits for that. You can make your own tower kit. You can use a light pole if you wanted to. I mean, obviously not. Don't use your light pole that your electricity's on, but you can set a light pole. You build your own stands. You can build your own windmill generators and your own windmills. I'm in the process of it. I haven't finished it yet. It's been years. It's been on the back burner, but I'm about halfway done. And if you ever want to come over and help me with it, man, I'll help you build one too. But I could use some help. Mainly keeping my wandering brain on track so I can actually focus on doing it.
I think you got too many irons in the fire, Chris.
I know. It's terrible.
Oh.
But the windmill I was designing and currently building should produce somewhere around 3 kilowatt hours of power, or 3 kilowatts of power. At peak, and I figured peak would be probably about a 30 mile an hour wind. Now I'm going to go back through there's a lot of math involved with doing a windmill. If you want to do it yourself, if you buy one from eBay, typically if it says it's 1,000-watt windmill, it's 1,000-watt windmill at 30 mile an hour winds. So you better make sure it's able to hit 30 mile winds, or else you're not going to generate shit. But it generates power when the sun doesn't shine. So when your solar panels aren't working, your windmill can do some work. And sometimes your windmill and solar panels will do work at the same time. But it's best to do a combination wind, water, and solar system. If you have a creek or something, you can make some sort of power generation off of that. If you live on a hill, you can make power every time it rains. If you use water generation, but for wind, we'll talk about wind. Wind is limited by the Betz coefficient, meaning you can only harvest about 59% of the total power of the wind. And then most windmills probably harvest about 30%. And then it's based on velocity cubed. So every time you double wind speed, you gain 8 times more power.
Wow.
Yeah. So at a 10 mile an hour wind, you might only be producing like 100 watts of power. At a 20 mile an hour wind, you'll produce 800 watts. Make sense? Yeah. So you can also use that to reverse. So if you have 1,000-watt windmill that produces 1,000 watts at, 30 mile an hour winds, then at 15 mile an hour winds, you're only producing 125 watts, roughly. Is that about right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's even hitting its cut-in voltage, because it has to be spinning fast enough to reach the charging voltage of your battery system or your grid tie inverter. So windmill's another alternative to that. And once I get that building further, I'll do some videos on it and of the build process and stuff. And I'll link some videos on YouTube and stuff to a guy who builds them. I think it's the Muddy Dirt Man or something. It's some dude in like Louisiana, and he builds all these out of car rotors and wheel bearings. And he does it pretty well on the cheap. The most expensive part's the magnets. So that being said, you can do wind, and that'll help supplement your solar when the sun isn't shining. And not everybody's going to be able to do water, but you could do water too. And I'll talk about a water catchment system, incorporating that into our water catchment system later. But so you need a way to store this power if you want to have a backup. And something people don't know about grid tie inverters is grid tie inverters, when the power goes off, they have anti-islanding protection, which means when the power goes off, your grid tie inverter shuts off. And now this is how a grid tie inverter works. A typical inverter takes a DC voltage. It makes whatever voltage you're at for whatever country you're in, at whatever frequency you're at for whatever country you're in, and that's it. And if you buy a cheap inverter, you're getting a square wave or a modified sine wave, and it's not very friendly to your electronics. You want any inverter that you buy, you want a pure sine wave inverter. That means
Yeah.
it's not a square wave. It's not a modified wave. It's not choppy. It's a nice linear wave, and that's what you want.
Yeah, you don't want to cheap out on your inverter,
No.
but you'll burn up your refrigerator and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's not. It wreaks havoc on induction motors and electronics. Anything that requires rectification circuits. They don't like. They really, really don't like square and modified sine wave because you're running off of. Okay, I don't have time to explain how rectification works. I'm getting way too into this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So back to your grid tie inverter. The grid tie inverter, it synchronizes your power output with the power output of the grid. So, example, if you took an off-the-shelf regular inverter, like one you could buy at a truck stop or something, and you hooked it up to your panel, and your panel is still tied into the grid, what's going to happen is you're going to let all the smoke out. Like a lot of it, because you're not synchronized with the frequency of the grid, meaning that when the grid's hitting its peak power, you might not be at the peak point of that sine wave. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to do a YouTube video on this and draw it all out to explain how all this works. It'll be on library.tv and YouTube, so I will do power explained, and that'll probably be a tomorrow project. But hear me out. So non-grid tie, you plug it into the grid, your shit blows up. Hopefully you don't get electrocuted. You probably just started a house fire. Now, this is where grid tie comes in play. What a grid tie inverter does is it has like a set of transistors in them. And what it does is you plug the grid tie inverter to the grid power, and it reads that grid power. It sees that sine wave, whether you're plugged into 120 or 240 volts. But in America, we're at 60 hertz. Everywhere else in the world is at 50 hertz. So I plug it into my 60 hertz system. It sees that voltage, and it uses those transistors to synchronize the inverter section of the inverter to the grid. So when your sine wave hits the peak on the grid, your sine wave on your inverter hits the peak. When you hit root mean squared, it's at root mean squared. When you hit 0, it's at 0, meaning you're not overlapping your sine waves and you're not backfeeding and forward feeding and blowing shit up. It's tied in. And your grid tie inverter generates power a couple volts higher than your grid power. And that allows it to backfeed the grid. And that will make your meter go slower. So used to, you had the analog meters with the thing that spun in it. It would make that little thing spin slower. Now we got digital meters. They don't have that. But if you were to pump enough power back into the grid, more than what you're consuming, that little knob would actually spin backwards, and you'd be generating power for the grid. And most places will allow you to sell back power that you don't use. For I think my REMC is at 2 cents a kilowatt hour is what you sell it back at, which isn't very much, but it's something. You know, and if you're generating enough to sell it back, that means you have no electric bill. And essentially, you're using the grid as a capacitor for your power, because when you're not using it, when you're not using power and you're producing more power, it's lowering your electric bill still because you're backfeeding the grid. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
It's a win-win. So that's what happens with grid tie inverters. Now, here's the downside. When the grid power stops, the inverter stops. It has no grid power to sync to. So if it has no grid power to sync to, it doesn't produce power. And the reason they do that is because what Steve talked about, you don't want to backfeed the grid when the power is out because you'll kill the lineman. Because you're generating anywhere from 5 to 13,800 volts, depending on where you're at in the line. And that's bad. So that's why they have anti-islanding protection. So There is a way to use your grid tie inverters off the grid, though. And we're going to talk about that. And here's how you set up a combination on-off grid system. So you're going to want some batteries. Now, deep cycle batteries, you don't want to use a regular car battery because they're not designed to cycle deep, and you'll ruin the batteries. It has to do with the plate thickness and the internal resistance of the battery. So you want like deep cycle batteries like you would use on trolling motors in your boat and RVs, stuff like that. Golf cart batteries, those are good. And you can also make your own batteries. I'll send a link to a video to a guy. His channel is called Cody's Lab, and he made lead acid batteries and tested them, and it works. So what a lead acid battery is, it's 2 lead plates with some sort of spacer in between it so they don't touch, and it's in some sort of electrolyte, usually sulfuric acid. And then when you charge it, one of your plates turns positive, one of your plates turns negative, and that's where your potential is stored. And then the more cells you put in series, and each cell has to be isolated from the other cells, but each cell you put in series, it multiplies the voltage. Think AA batteries or D batteries in your mag light. We'll use a D cell mag light. It takes 2 D cells, right? You put them positive, negative, positive, negative. Those are 1.5 volt batteries. You get 3 volts of power. That's how that works. If you spin one battery backwards, it cancels them out, and you get 0 volts of power. If you run 2 batteries in parallel, you get 1.5 volts of power, but you get twice the amperage because you've cut the internal resistance of the battery in half, and you get twice the amp capacity. But it's still the same power because it's still the same 2 batteries. So that's how that works. So you can make your own battery. Go to your local automotive store or your local tire store and buy buckets of wheel weights from them. Cast them into bullets. That's a better use for them. But if you don't cast them into bullets, you can make batteries out of them by casting plates, putting them in cells. And I'll try to do a video on this. Real small scale, making a small 12-volt battery here in the near future. But you can make your own batteries, and it'd be about a quarter of the cost of buying. Now, you can't just obviously hook your solar panels and windmill up to these batteries, because what will happen is you'll overcharge them and you'll ruin the batteries. So you need a charge controller. Found a charge controller with 60 amps on Amazon for $30. 60 amps is a pretty reasonable charge controller. That's a pretty decent amount of power. You've got to figure, at 24 volts at 60 amps, that's pull up the calculator again.
Yeah, hey, bro, I'm going to have to wrap this up.
Yeah, 1,440 watts. Okay, yeah, we're going to have to wrap this up.
Yeah, I'm down to 2% on my phone.
Oh, okay. Well,
so we'll have to do another one to finish this up. I'm sure this is a good one. I like talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is gonna be a really long episode, and
it's gonna have to be a 2-parter.
You wanna try to do it tomorrow after work on the way home?
What time would that be?
I should be on the road by 3:30 to 4.
Okay, we'll shoot for that.
Okay, that sounds good. So
don't forget where you're at. We're doing the charger. You gotta run it through a charger controller.
Yep, gotta run it through a charge controller. Boom. Okay, so there we're at on that. We will continue this tomorrow, and you all have a nice day.
All right, dude.
All right, welcome back. I'm in the car now, and Steve's on the other end of the mic again, and we're going to finish this up. And we left off talking about charge controllers and batteries, and we talked about grid tie inverters and tying solar panels to the grid for cost savings and backfeeding the grid. Now we're going to talk about how you can do a combination on-off grid system where you can do both and have a backup if the power goes out, which is, I think, what most people would like, at least. So let's roll into that. We were talking about charge controllers. So what a charge controller does, let's back up for a second. So if you got say your solar panels are outputting like 30 something volts, right? I think those 250 watt panels I was talking about, they output like 38 volts.
Okay.
So what happens is if you hook that 38 volt panel up to a 12 volt battery, what's going to happen is that voltage is going to drop to 14.4 volts, which is the charging volt of the battery, and everything else is going to go through and be amperage added to it. Same thing with a windmill. Now, when you make electricity with a windmill, if you build an alternator, you're making three-phase AC electricity, and you have to run it through a rectifier to make it into DC. So keep that in mind. But if you hook that up to a battery, that windmill up to a battery, it doesn't matter if it's got, open circuit voltage of 80 volts. As soon as you hook it up to that 12 volt battery, your voltage is going to be 14.4 volts.
Are you still there?
Yeah.
I'm kicked on again.
Yeah.
I
I
gotta.
hear some.
All right. I killed Bluetooth, so we should be good.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was hearing some echo going on.
Yeah, that's what it was. So you don't want to put your windmill or solar panels directly to a battery because you'll overcharge them and you'll actually ruin the batteries. It's really inefficient. The maximum efficiency you can see charging a battery, including lead acid batteries, is like 70%. So you're losing quite a bit of efficiency right off the bat just by charging the batteries. So what you want to do is you want a charge controller. So what that does is it charges the batteries. It allows current to flow and charge the batteries until the batteries are full. And then once the batteries are full, it diverts all the leftover power that you're producing into a dump load. And that dump load could be multiple things. It could be, a DC heating element for your water heater. It could be an electrolysis kit to make hydrogen gas to power your car on, and it can be grid tie inverters. So what you do is you charge your battery bank, and then once your battery bank's charged, it swaps over and starts charging or starts sending power to your grid tie inverters, so you're lowering your electric bill. Because your grid tie inverters are running at close to 90% efficiency, so you're gaining quite a bit of efficiency by running most of your power through the grid tie inverters. Well, what happens when you turn the power off? Well, on a grid tie inverter, obviously when you turn the power off, it's got that anti-islanding, so it's going to shut down the grid tie inverters because it's not seeing grid power. So this is where you're going to run some weird shit with your state and local laws. Steve, I don't think you can do what I'm talking about because you're in Kentucky and you guys have all those asinine laws. Or is that just Jefferson County?
That might be Jefferson County. Are you talking about using battery banks to power your house if you lose power, but at the same time when you're not using your battery banks, you're tying it to the grid?
Yeah,
what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. So what's going to happen is once your power goes out, you can basically I'm going to make my own automatic transfer switch. I would recommend following the National Electrical Code and getting a UL listed and all that other bullshit. But honestly, a UL listed transfer switch is like fucking $2,000.
Yeah, they're expensive.
Yeah. So poor man's solution to this, because I'm a po' boy, is when I worked for another contractor, a contractor that you also worked with at a shit plant.
I know who you're talking about.
You know who I'm talking about. Yeah, those guys. Yeah. Well, when they were moving the shop, I inherited a bunch of shit off of them. I got a bunch of electrical stuff. I've got motor starters. I've got disconnects. I've got freaking buckets. I've got I ended up with like thousands of feet of PVC pipe, all kinds of stuff because they were throwing it all away. And I was like, please don't throw it out of the way. I could use that. So the moral of the story is, if you guys ever go to a construction site, chances are there's some good shit that's being chucked into a dumpster or being thrown away by some of these contractors. Ask them for it. Worst they can say is no. Second worst thing they can say is you can't have it for free. Give me $10 for it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Right.
it doesn't hurt to ask. Go ask these people, and then take whatever conduit you can. Take whatever motor starters, fucking electric motors. Doesn't matter if it's a 3-phase motor or not. Take it. You can turn a 3-phase motor into an alternator by drilling out the squirrel cage in it and putting permanent magnets in it. So, backtracking. So our power's off. Now what? Well, you're still going to be able to use your grid tie inverters when the power's off by feeding it another voltage source. So the grid tie inverter doesn't care if it sees grid power, generator power, or power from another off-grid inverter. As long as it sees something that it can sync to and it's a pure sine wave, not that shitty-ass square wave or that modified sine wave, boom, you're golden. It will synchronize itself in phase with that power source, and it will out a couple volts extra, and then you're good. You got good clean power. So what you can do is I'm taking 2 NEMA 2 motor starters. They're rated for 90 amps each. Now, this is going to be on the AC side, and 90 amps at 240 volts is a significant amount of power, more power than I'll probably ever be able to generate. So I should be good. You know what I'm saying? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect my my feeders from my meter off my main, and I'm going to run them over to a separate box and connect them to a NEMA 2 motor starter. 2 of them. I'll have 2 motor starters. So the first one I'll connect. So, shit, now I lost my train of thought. Okay, back at it. Okay, so.
You'll never be able to produce enough power to overload them.
Yeah, you got to figure, man, like 90 amps. I got a 200 amp service, but I never use that 200 amps. Like, I probably don't even use 40 of that at any given point in time. So, obviously, you're not, whatever. I think 90 amps would be good, at least as a backup. And that would actually get you, like, you could run your HVAC and shit through that. So, that's not a big deal. So I'm going to take my feeders. Now I'm going to call my RMC. I don't have any laws here saying I can't do any of this. I've talked to the electrical inspector. He said he didn't give a shit. Call the power company. I called the power company. They said if I want to sell back electricity, just make sure that I call them so they can swap the meter out. And that's it. They don't care what I do. So, which is great because I'm going to call them. I'm going to have them pull the meter. And it's going to kill my feeders. I'm going to put my feeders on the line side of a NEMA 2 motor starter. On the load side, I'm going to take that connection and I'm going to run it over to my panel. Now, on the second motor starter, I'm going to hook up an inverter, an off-grid inverter that'll run off. I'd like to find one that's MPPT, maximum power point tracking, so it doesn't necessarily have to run off the batteries, but it can. And then I'm going to feed that into the line side of my NEMA 2 motor starter, my other one. And off the load side, I'm going to bring that into the panel as well with the load side of the other one. Basically, I'm going to jumper the load sides in parallel. So what's going to happen is when the power is on, I'm going to wire the coil on that NEMA 2 motor starter to where it closes it when the power's on line power. On my NEMA motor starter 1, we'll call it MS1. So MS1, the coil is going to be powered by 120 volt control voltage off of my grid power. So when the grid power shuts off, it's going to drop that NEMA 2 motor starter out. If it drops that NEMA 2 motor starter out, I'm going to have a normally open contact or a normally closed contact hooked from my inverter power, my off-grid inverter, over to the other NEMA 2 motor starter, MS2. And it's going to be hooked to the coil of it. So when the line power drops out, I'm also going to put a timer in there. I'm going to put a 10-second timer in there. So when the line side drops out, when that MS1 shuts off, my 10-second mechanical timer will start clicking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. After 10 seconds, it's going to energize the MS2, which is going to close and allow inverter power, off-grid inverter power, to transfer over into my panel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'll also run another contactor, so when it sees that grid power is off, it knows to turn on that inverter.
Right.
And when it turns that inverter on, it will turn MS2 on, my NEMA 2 motor starter that is connected to that inverter, and power my panel while simultaneously isolating me from the grid. Now, once that off-grid inverter powers my panel, and it could be like, 500 watt, 1,000 watt inverter, it doesn't really matter, because your grid tie inverters only need to see like 5 watts each to run. Once your grid tie inverters then see that power from your off-grid inverter, they will turn on and start producing power to higher efficiency. So what will happen is your charge controller will be dumping that power in there, and once that power is not being produced, it will drop out, and your batteries will run your power during like the night or when it's not windy or whatever. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And I'll also make it to where you can hook up a generator too, and use the generator to charge the batteries if you just don't get enough wind and sun to recharge your batteries.
Yeah.
So I know that sounds complicated talking about it on a podcast, but I'm going to do a video on it. I've already started the video on it, drawing out the diagram on how everything will work. And I will draw a practical diagram, like an actual finished product diagram, and I will draw a ladder diagram to show you the relay ladder logic behind it. And I also might control it on a PA. Just depends.
Right. And just want to add, the reason you put a delay, our general non-electrical people might not know this, is because the grid system oftentimes has oil switches on them, and the oil switches will cycle. And so if like a limb or something falls and hits it, it has to cycle 3 times before it completely cuts the power off, because if it clears itself on the first hit or the second hit, you'll maintain power. So you've got to have a delay to give those oil switches time to completely turn off.
Yeah.
So that way you're not. It's because if you have your power come on right as soon as it loses power, you could have 2 voltages kind of bump heads at the same time. Whereas,
And that's when you let the smoke out.
yeah, because it's cycling. It's going to be cycling. And if you ever notice that, next time, for anybody that listens to this and you got a windy day, notice your lights will cycle 3 times before you're, oftentimes, unless it's just a catastrophic transformer failure, in which case it'll just go out. But a lot of times, if it's wind or snow or ice, they'll blink 3 times. On that 3rd time, that's it. That's the oil switches that finally said there's a problem. We're not sending power down the line anymore. And then that's where your delay comes in, that you're talking about. That keeps you from blowing stuff up.
Yeah. And that goes the other way too, because when it does bump, you don't want it to sit there and drop out your off-grid power if it's going to sit there and bump. And another thing, what that does too is if you allow 10 seconds, it allows all the magnetic fields and all your induction motors to collapse and
Right.
neutralize themselves too. So on contrary, a part that I did forget was I'm going to run two 10-second timers, one for the line side. So once the line power bounces off, it waits 10 seconds, and one on the load side. So if it decides it wants to come back on and bounce again, while my off-grid power is on, it has to see 10 seconds of consecutive line power, grid power, before it will actually swap back over and just run off the grid and utilize the grid tie inverters.
Right. Yeah.
And
Because
what I'll do,
sometimes when they turn power back on, they don't catch everything that was messed up, and then it blows up again, and then they have to go figure out where the next problem was.
yeah. And then another thing that I plan on doing is, instead of powering both my barn and house panels on off-grid power, I'm going to get about 100. I'm going to get a 100 amp sub panel, and just use my off-grid power to power that sub panel with just those critical loads. So it'll be powered on and off grid. That panel will be powered on and off grid through the same MS1 and MS2 system, the motor starters. But only that panel will be on when the grid power is off. And that'll keep me from running, if I'm running like high draw loads, like my electric range and stuff, and the power goes off and it kicks on backup power, that'll keep it from just sucking all my backup power down real quick.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Okay.
And like I said, most of these panels, and if you find somebody demo and stuff, just ask for the old crap. It's probably still good. You could use it for that. As a matter of fact, those panels I'm talking about, I think I got those out of BAE that were getting thrown away. Remember those little panels we got that had it would hold like 10 breakers?
Yeah.
You should be able to run all your emergency loads off 10 breakers. And then if you want, you can transfer power back to your main panel if you ever get to the point where you produce enough power to be able to run your entire house off of it. So that's a way you can start small too. And like I said, the grid tie inverters are stackable, so you just keep stacking them. When you put more solar panels up, more windmills, your hydro system, whatever, you can just keep stacking them. So there's that.
There you go. Sounds good. Yeah, you're definitely going to have to do like a video and walk people through this so they'll have a visual too.
Exactly. I plan on it. And I'll also do a video on making your own lead acid batteries too. Because another thing you can do is you can buy a tote. You can buy some Epsom salt. You can go to your local auto parts store and buy buckets of wheel weights and sort out all the lead ones. And then you can make your own lead plates and then run them and make a lead acid battery out of them with a little bit of fiberglass. Fiberglass is cheap too. You can put fiberglass between the plates and basically make if you ever heard of an advanced glass mat battery or an AGM battery, that's what they are. They're like it's not a complete wet cell. It's considered a dry cell, but they basically have a fiberglass medium in between them that holds the electrolyte. And that's it. So there's that. And those batteries are much cheaper than making your own anything is much cheaper than buying it in the store. It just depends on how far you're willing to go to save money, how much time you're willing to invest in order to save money.
Yeah. Most of the time it's a time thing.
Most of the time it's a time thing.
Yeah, most of the time that's, they don't make them better. They just make them faster.
Exactly.
That's the American way. And, people I think have been conditioned to think that factories make stuff better. No, they just make stuff faster and cheaper. They don't necessarily make it better. Yeah.
Factories are there to mass produce stuff. Typically a novice woodsmith a novice carpenter or a woodworker can probably make better quality stuff out of better material than what you can buy at like IKEA and stuff. However, I don't feel like making a LAC table for a 3D printer enclosure because I don't have time. So I'm going to go buy one for $9.99, and it's made out of recycled cardboard. Plus tax and shipping. Fucking taxes.
Don't go there, Chris.
Yeah,
Keep it-
but so what are some other things, Steve, that we should talk about that we could possibly make our lives easier and save money in doing so by buying these things with our tax money instead of wasting it on a flat screen TV that we probably don't need?
Well, if you're looking at getting into self-sufficiency, either rabbits or chickens.
Rabbits and
Probably
chickens.
the cheapest and fastest, easiest way to get yourself into food that you're raising on your own and it's completely organic, with the least amount of resources to get it going. So coops are not that expensive to build.
Yes.
You can build them out of junk, really. But if you're somebody that wants really nice stuff, you can actually just spend the money and build one.
Yeah, I built mine out of an old phalanx crate I got from Raytheon.
Yeah. So, and then like my first coop, I built it out of a junk cabinet with 2 doors on it. It was like a wardrobe cabinet that was like 4 feet tall, and it was made out of that crappy pressed plywood. And the chickens didn't care, and I had those chickens for like 5 years, until my neighbor's cat killed them. So anyway, yeah. So I would either research if you don't mind eating rabbit, which domesticated rabbit is as good as chicken fried. Rabbit, I'm not into raising rabbits yet. That's on the list. But as far as a sustainable food source, you have fresh meat every 28 days out of rabbits.
I used to raise rabbits as a kid. My parents did. And rabbits are the fastest reproducing protein source, I think, known to man, other than like maybe grasshoppers. I really don't feel like eating grasshoppers.
Yeah, your insects are number one, but if you're not into eating insects, then you go with rabbits, and rabbits taste amazing.
And I've heard, was it Coturnix quails? Reproduce really quick too, and are easy, and you can actually store them in a barn if you're in an urban environment. I was talking to a guy. I think we might bring him on the podcast to talk about quails because he raises quails in his barn.
Okay.
Eventually too. So, but Steve's the chicken man and the duck.
Yeah.
And
so the next thing is that, I love fresh chicken eggs, man. I mean, the protein source from chicken eggs is phenomenal.
They taste better than the store, and they're way healthier.
It's I can't even eat eggs that aren't fresh anymore. It's just I can't even eat them. It's horrible. So then so if you got the space and you want to have a ton of chickens, you can eat the chickens, and then you can sell chickens if you don't, and then all your extra eggs you can sell to friends and neighbors, and then that pays for other stuff, because then a handful of chickens are going to lay more eggs than you'll ever eat, and then the extra ones that they lay you can sell for money or trade
or store them so you got eggs throughout the winter too.
Yeah, or store them. I still have a couple bags of frozen ones. Of course, I didn't realize my chickens were going to lay so good this winter. They've been laying between 9 and a dozen eggs every day.
Wow.
1 week. So I've been selling eggs through the winter to my friends because they've been laying as many as I can eat and then some. So
I need to buy some off of you, man.
Chickens take up very little space. Coops are easy to build. Chickens are not picky. Most birds in general are not picky. And then they just lay really quality eggs. and that's just a good source of protein. Just a really good source of protein. That doesn't take a lot of money to get started with chickens.
Yeah.
So
You can also compost your eggshells and use eggshells to add calcium back into your soil.
Yep, which I got my compost pile going right now. I've been composting I've started composting all my coffee grinds and all my eggshells.
Oh yeah, I compost everything that isn't a slab of meat gets composted.
Yeah, well, and almost all my vegetables, either any scraps go to the chickens or the goats. So
that's composting too, though, because they're eating it and then they're pooping out compost.
Exactly. So in the end, I'm still getting compost from it. It's just in a different form that's delayed.
Exactly.
But it is what it is. So that would be my recommendation. Either backup power and sources of food. That's the biggies. We're so dependent on electric today. Unless you want to learn how to preserve all your own meat and not use electric. Otherwise, you're going to be tied to electric your whole life.
Yeah.
And it does make life easier. It's just once you get used to living with electric, if you don't have ways to deal with it when it goes out, it can be a real problem. So, yeah, that's my recommendation, man.
And another recommendation, this is a cheap one. Actually, it's a cheap two. Get a food dehydrator and get a vacuum sealer. Get a really good vacuum sealer, like a deluxe edition food saver. It has, it's saving all my meat from freezer burn. Food save meat, if it's stored in a cold environment, to the best of my knowledge, that meat doesn't even have to be frozen and it'll last like 5 years.
Wow.
Because there's no oxygen for any microbes to grow in. If you food save your dried goods, your beans, your rice, and you can dehydrate vegetables and food save them, that stuff will last 25 to 30 years. And it's a good backup. Take all your surplus, dehydrate it, and food save it, and then it's there when you need it. If you want a quick meal, like say you want to do a vegetable soup one day. Well, you can whip out your food saved ground beef. You can fry it up, and then add in your canned tomato juice, because you can can the juice from your tomatoes and your diced tomatoes and stuff. Tomatoes can really well. And then all your other stuff, like your beans, your squash, your carrots, your peas, whatever other vegetables you want to put in that dish, you dehydrate it and you vacuum seal it. So you just pop it open, you dump it in with your tomato juice. Your tomato juice and water and chicken stock or whatever you want to use rehydrates it as you cook it. Boom. Instant meal. Stuff like that. Just, you got to think outside the box with stuff like this. And don't let anything go to waste. If you got onions that are about to go bad, dice them up and food save them. Freeze them. Or dice them up, dehydrate them, and then food save them. Doesn't matter if you food save them and freeze them, or food save them or dehydrate them and food save them. They'll last a lot longer and you're not wasting it. So look into different ways to preserve food. All American pressure canners, they don't have any kind of weird gaskets that need to be replaced, and they're expensive, like $125. But I think they'll do 21 quarts. And you can pressure can stuff over a fire, so long as you have a grate or some way to maintain and regulate the heat, which will regulate the pressure.
Yeah.
My grandma and grandpa have a gas stove in their shed that they use for nothing but canning stuff. And I'm still eating canned beans that were canned by my mom in 2008. It's 2021. They taste okay.
We just ate some salsa that was canned from like 2010 by my one friend.
That's another good thing that cans really well is salsa. Everybody loves salsa. You can take your corn, you can dry it, you can blend it up and powder it into cornmeal. And then once you do that, you can food save it. It'll last forever because it's dry. And then you can rehydrate it with water and make your own tortilla chips or tortillas for salsa. Actually, I'm not turning there because that road is full of ice. Nope, not doing it. So what else we got?
I don't know. I think we're pretty much. I think we've given people enough to chew on.
Yeah, I got a couple more things. Water catchment. IBC totes on
Yeah,
now.
buy some totes. Buy some totes.
IBC totes are $50 to $70 a piece. PVC pipes cheap. Look at doing a gray water system, but I'd look at doing rainwater first because it's way cheaper. Look into a Berkey filter to filter your rainwater to where it's drinkable. Also, I'll send a link for a Home Depot a link for a reverse osmosis filter. I plan on doing reverse osmosis on just my sink and fridge and having a Berkey filter as a backup. Hang on, my wife's calling me again.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah. I plan on doing a sketch video on a water catchment system. So an easy way to get fittings for your water catchment system would be to buy a 3D printer. And 3D printers, the Ender 3 runs $200 or less usually. Check out 3dprintersgobird.com. For about $100 worth of upgrades, you can be printing like glass-filled nylon and polycarbonate and stuff and be making some really cool stuff, particularly firearms if you choose to go that route. If not, you can also print out the stuff for your water catchment system, the fittings. You can print out bell siphons for aquaponic systems. You can print out conduit fittings, all kinds of stuff. You can print out insulators for an electric fence, whatever. You name it, you can print it, and it's on demand. And with that, also you can buy and plant trees. Rent a backhoe, dig a pond. Million things you could do other than spend your money on stupid shit and toilet paper.
Chris, you're fun.
There, I tried. Do
Right.
do with this information what you will.
All right, man. Well, it sounds good. I'm gonna have to bump off here, man.
All right, I'll catch you later.
I think we got a good one for folks.
Yeah, it's been a good one. And with that, folks, we're gonna wrap this up and hope you all gain some self-sufficiency and have a wonderful day.